Some moments are etched in the steel frame of an airplane before it ever leaves the ground. For the 187 souls on American Endeavour, Flight 214 from Chicago to Washington, D.C., a routine Tuesday morning was about to become an unforgettable lesson in power prejudice and the crushing weight of karma. It wasn't turbulence or engine trouble that would shake them to their core, but a conflict between two men, one a pilot reigning from his cockpit kingdom, the other a passenger who carried a secret far more powerful than any airline uniform. The pilot thought he held all the cards, but he was about to learn that some clearance badges unlock more than just doors they can dismantle a man's entire life. The air inside the cabin of the Boeing 737 was thick with the usual symphony of pre-flight anxiety, the synthetic click of overhead bins snapping shut the murmur of hushed conversations, and the faint, sterile smell of recycled air and jet fuel. Dr. Marcus Thorne, seated in an aisle seat in the premium economy section, was an island of calm in this river of controlled chaos. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet authority. His shaved head gleamed under the cabin lights, and his wire-rimmed glasses sat perched on a nose that had clearly been broken once or twice in a life lived before academia and sterile government offices. He was 48, but his eyes held the steady, patient gaze of someone much older. He was speaking softly into his phone, his voice a low, modulated baritone. "The asset is secure, but the delivery window is shrinking. Tell General Miller that Project Chimera is proceeding, but we have a new variable, a significant one. No, I can't elaborate on an open line. I'll be sterile in 2 hours. Thorne out." He ended the call just as the lead flight attendant made the final announcement about stowing electronic devices. He complied instantly, sliding the sleek encrypted device into his leather briefcase and tucking it securely under the seat in front of him. He was on his way to the Pentagon for a briefing that had the potential to shift U.S. cybersecurity policy for the next decade. The words he'd used, asset, delivery window, Project Chimera, were standard unclassified placeholders, but to the untrained ear, they could sound ominous. Up in the cockpit, Captain Richard "Rick" Jensen was not having a good day. At 55 with a receding hairline and a gut that strained against the buttons of his crisp white pilot's shirt, Jensen ruled his cockpit with an iron fist. He was a 20-year veteran of the airline, a man who believed his authority was absolute from the moment the cabin door was sealed. He saw the plane not as a vessel for transporting people, but as his personal domain, and the passengers as unpredictable cargo. His co-pilot, a much younger and more easygoing man named Tom Bridges, was going through the final pre-flight checklist. Jensen, however, was scanning the small CCTV monitor that showed the boarding cabin. His eyes narrowed. "Get me Sarah on the horn," he grunted. Tom patched him through to the lead flight attendant's station. "Go for Sarah." "Sarah, it's the captain." Jensen's voice crackled through the receiver, already laced with irritation. "Who's the guy in 12C? The one in the suit making a phone call like he's James Bond." Sarah Jenkins, a consummate professional with a warm smile that belied a no-nonsense attitude, discreetly glanced down the aisle. "That would be Dr. Thorne, Captain. He's already ended his call and stowed his device. He was very compliant." "I don't like it," Jensen snapped. "He was talking about assets and delivery windows. Sounds like trouble. Keep an eye on him. A close eye." Sarah sighed internally. She knew Captain Jensen's reputation. He was known for being overly suspicious, particularly with passengers who didn't fit his narrow suburban mold of what a safe traveler looked like. He'd once delayed a flight for an hour to have a group of college students on a spring break trip questioned because they were too boisterous. "Understood, Captain," she replied, her voice professionally neutral. As the plane pushed back from the gate at Chicago O'Hare, a subtle tension had already been introduced into the cabin's ecosystem. Dr. Thorne, oblivious to the scrutiny from the cockpit, was reviewing documents from his briefcase pages, filled with complex algorithms and network diagrams. He was focused his mind already thousands of miles away in a soundproof briefing room. Meanwhile, Captain Jensen stewed. The man in 12C represented a challenge to his authority. He was too calm, too well-dressed, too something. Jensen couldn't put his finger on it, but a seed of irrational suspicion had been planted, and in the fertile ground of his ego, it was beginning to grow. He had the final say on who was and was not a threat on his aircraft, and he had a bad feeling about Dr. Marcus Thorne. He decided with a grim sense of self-importance that he would not ignore it. The 737 taxied towards the runway, a lumbering metal beast awaiting its turn to conquer the sky. Inside the cabin had settled into a quiet hum. For most passengers, the journey had already begun, their minds drifting to their destinations, their families, their business meetings. For Dr. Thorne, it was a precious window of time to prepare. For Captain Jensen, it was an escalating internal monologue of suspicion. He clicked the intercom to the flight attendant's station again. "Sarah, what's our man in 12C doing now?" Sarah, who was performing her final safety checks, paused and glanced over. "He's reading some papers, Captain. Looks like technical documents. He's quiet and keeping to himself." "Technical documents? What kind of technical documents?" Jensen's voice was sharp, accusatory. "I can't possibly say, Captain. They appear to be professional work materials." Sarah's patience was wearing thin. The push for an on-time departure was a priority, and the captain's fixation felt like a dangerous distraction. "I want you to go over there and ask him to put those papers away," Jensen commanded. "Tell him it's for the comfort and security of the other passengers." Sarah balked. "Captain, with all due respect, that's not standard procedure. He's not violating any airline or FAA regulations. I can't ask a passenger to stop reading unless his materials are causing a disturbance or are clearly offensive." The silence on the other end was heavy. When Jensen spoke again, his voice was dangerously low. "Are you refusing an order from your captain, Ms. Jenkins?" Sarah felt a chill. She knew this was a line she couldn't cross without risking her job. "No, Captain," she said, her voice tight. "I'll go speak with him." She walked down the aisle, her professional smile feeling like a lead mask. She stopped next to Dr. Thorne's seat. "Excuse me, sir." Dr. Thorne looked up, his expression neutral. "Yes." "I'm so sorry to disturb you." She began, hating every word she was about to say. "The captain has requested that you put your documents away for the time being." Thorne blinked slowly, his brow furrowing slightly. "Is there a problem? These are essential for my work upon landing." He stated it was a matter of passenger comfort and security, Sarah said, feeling her cheeks flush with embarrassment. A woman in the window seat, a sharp-looking woman in her late 30s named Amelia Vance, looked over with a quizzical expression. She recognized the request was bizarre. Dr. Thorne considered Sarah for a moment, his gaze analytical, but not unkind. He seemed to understand she was just the messenger. With a quiet sigh of resignation, he neatly stacked his papers, slid them into a folder, and placed the folder back inside his briefcase. He then zipped the briefcase shut. "There. Is that satisfactory?" he asked, his tone perfectly level. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir," Sarah said, quickly retreating to her station. She reported back to the captain. "Sir, the passenger has complied. His documents are stowed." For a moment, there was only the sound of the engines whining. Jensen should have been satisfied. The passenger had complied. The threat was neutralized. But for a man like Jensen, compliance wasn't enough. The fact that the passenger had questioned the order even for a second felt like a personal slight. His prejudice, having found a target, now demanded escalation. "It's not good enough," Jensen declared. "His attitude is all wrong. He's being difficult. I'm not comfortable with him on my aircraft. I'm turning us around. We're heading back to the gate." A gasp was audible from the co-pilot, Tom Bridges. "Rick, are you serious? We're number 3 for takeoff. We'll lose our slot. Corporate will have a fit over a guy reading papers." "He's a security risk, Tom. I have a gut feeling, and my gut has kept me safe for 20 years in this job," Jensen retorted, his voice rising. He was beyond reason, now operating on pure ego and bias. He keyed his microphone to make the announcement to the cabin. His voice, usually a smooth, reassuring baritone, was now clipped and cold. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor security issue on board, which requires our attention. We will be returning to the gate momentarily. Please remain in your seats." A wave of groans and worried murmurs swept through the cabin. Dr. Thorne's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened. He knew with a sinking certainty who the minor security issue was. The 737, which had been so close to freedom, slowly turned and began its humiliating crawl back towards the terminal. Every passenger was now looking around, trying to spot the source of the problem. A few eyes, guided by Jensen's earlier pointed scrutiny, landed on Dr. Marcus Thorne. He sat perfectly still, a silent statue, in the eye of a hurricane he hadn't created, but which was now aimed directly at him. The jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft with a dull metallic thud that sounded like a gavel falling. The cabin door was opened, and a harried-looking gate agent, Brenda, appeared, her face a mask of confusion. The festive mood of departure had evaporated, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. Captain Rick Jensen emerged from the cockpit. He strode down the aisle with an air of self-importance, his chest puffed out. He ignored the questioning looks from the passengers and stopped directly in front of seat 12C. He stood over Dr. Thorne, deliberately using his height and uniform to intimidate. "So, okay," Jensen said, his voice loud enough for the entire front section of the plane to hear. "I'm Captain Jensen. You are being removed from this flight." Dr. Thorne looked up calmly, his hands resting on his knees. "On what grounds, Captain?" "I am not required to provide you with grounds," Jensen said smugly. "The pilot in command has final authority regarding the safety and security of this aircraft. My decision is that you are a security risk. Now please gather your belongings and deplane immediately." The passengers were in shock. Murmurs turned into audible whispers. What did he do? He hasn't said a word. The lawyer Amelia Vance, in the window seat, leaned forward. "Captain, I'm an officer of the court. What specific action did this passenger take to warrant removal?" Jensen shot her a venomous look. "Ma'am, this does not concern you. Stay out of it." He turned back to Thorne. "Let's go. We don't have all day. You're holding up 186 other people." Dr. Thorne didn't move. His gaze was locked on Jensen, and the calm facade was now overlaid with a layer of something much harder. It was the look of a man who had faced down far more dangerous adversaries than a petty airline captain. "Captain," Thorne said, his voice still low, but now resonating with a new steely authority, "I would advise you to reconsider this course of action. It is a profound mistake." Jensen laughed a short, ugly bark. "A mistake. The only mistake was letting you on this plane in the first place. Are you going to get up, or do I have to have airport security drag you out of here?" As if on cue, 2 airport police officers appeared at the cabin door, summoned by the gate agent at Jensen's request. They were large men, their faces impassive, their presence immediately ratcheting up the tension. Sarah, the flight attendant, watched from the galley, her heart pounding. This was a nightmare. It was a gross abuse of power, and she was a helpless witness. She caught Tom, the co-pilot's eye, as he briefly stuck his head out of the cockpit. He looked pale and deeply uncomfortable, but utterly neutered by his superior's rank. Dr. Thorne slowly took a breath. He seemed to be making a calculation, weighing options with the speed of a supercomputer. He had given the captain every opportunity to de-escalate, to reverse his foolish, prejudiced decision. The pilot had not only refused, but had doubled down, bringing in law enforcement and making a public spectacle. The time for quiet compliance was over. "Very well, Captain," Dr. Thorne said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He reached down, not for his briefcase handle, but for the latch. He clicked it open. Jensen smirked, thinking the man was finally complying. The officers took a step forward, ready to escort him off. But Dr. Thorne didn't stand up. Instead, he reached inside his briefcase and pulled out a simple black leather wallet. He didn't flash it around. He opened it slowly, deliberately, and held it up for Captain Jensen to see. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was not a driver's license or a credit card. It was a dark blue identification card. At the top, in stark gold lettering, were the words, United States Department of Defense. Below his photograph and name, Thorne Marcus, Ph.D., was the iconic seal of the Pentagon. But that wasn't what made the blood drain from Captain Jensen's face. It wasn't what made the two airport cops freeze in their tracks. It was the line of text printed in a bold, severe font beneath his name, a line that was rarely ever seen outside the most secure facilities in the world. Clearance TSSCI, SITKGHCSP. Jensen's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He might have been an airline pilot, but even he knew what TSSCI meant: top secret, sensitive compartmented information. It was the highest level of security clearance granted by the US government. The additional acronyms SI, Special Intelligence, TK Talent, DAR, Keyhole for Satellite Intel, G Gamma for Signals Intelligence, HCSP, Human Control System Product, were so esoteric, so deeply classified, that just knowing what they stood for was likely illegal for him. This wasn't just some troublesome passenger. This was a man who operated at the highest echelons of national security, a man whose work was deemed so critical that he was entrusted with the nation's most sensitive secrets. Dr. Thorne held the badge steady, letting the reality of the situation sink into the captain's thick skull. Then he spoke, and his voice was no longer that of a passenger. It was the voice of command. "Captain Jensen." "Doctor," Thorne said, his words cutting through the stunned silence like shards of ice. "My travel today is not discretionary. It is a Priority 1 mission under the direct authority of the Department of Defense. By attempting to remove me from this flight, you are not just inconveniencing a passenger. You are actively interfering with a matter of United States national security. You have made your decision. Now I will make mine." He calmly retrieved his encrypted satellite phone from his briefcase. He pressed a single button. The phone didn't dial, it simply connected. "This is Raven Actual," he said into the phone, his voice crisp and official. "I have a Code 7 interference incident. O'Hare International Gate, C-17, American Endeavour Flight 214. The obstruction is the pilot in command, Captain Richard Jensen. Yes, sir. I understand the protocol. Stand by." He lowered the phone and looked directly at the now ashen-faced pilot. "Captain," Dr. Thorne said coolly, "you have just grounded this aircraft, but you're not speaking with the FAA anymore. In approximately 10 minutes, you will be speaking with agents from the Department of Defense. I suggest you find a comfortable place to wait." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from tense to surreal. The pilot, Captain Rick Jensen, who had been the master of his universe just moments before, now looked like a man who had seen a ghost. He stood frozen in the aisle, his face a pallid shade of grey, the ID badge in Dr. Thorne's hand, seemingly burning an image into his retinas. The two airport police officers who had been ready to physically remove a passenger now looked utterly lost. They exchanged a nervous glance, implicitly deciding to do nothing until a higher authority than a mere airline captain arrived. Amelia Vance, the prosecutor in the window seat, watched the entire exchange with a mixture of professional awe and grim satisfaction. She knew exactly what had just happened. A civilian with a god complex had picked a fight with the full, unblinking might of the U.S. national security apparatus. It was like watching a man in a rowboat try to ram an aircraft carrier. Dr. Thorne remained seated, a portrait of serene control. He held his satellite phone loosely in his hand, waiting. He didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." His victory was so complete, so absolute, that any further comment would have been superfluous. The first sign of the new reality arrived in the form of the gate agent Brenda, who rushed back onto the plane, her eyes wide with panic. "Captain Jensen!" She hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. "My manager just got a call from the Department of Defense. They told us under no circumstances is this plane to move. They said federal agents are en route. What did you do?" Jensen couldn't answer. He could only stare at Dr. Thorne, the architect of his sudden, catastrophic downfall. True to Dr. Thorne's word, it wasn't 10 minutes. It was 7. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits boarded the plane. They moved with an economy of motion that spoke of federal training. They weren't FBI or local police. They had the unmistakable severe aura of Defense Investigative Service agents. They completely ignored the passengers, the flight crew, and the airport police. Their focus was singular. The lead agent, a man with cold blue eyes and a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite, approached Dr. Thorne's seat. He did not address the captain. "Dr. Thorne," he asked, his voice low and respectful. "Agent Connors." Thorne acknowledged with a slight nod. "Glad you could make it. The director is displeased with this delay." Agent Connors said, a universe of meaning packed into that single word. "We have a sterile vehicle on the tarmac waiting for you. Your briefing at the Pentagon has been rescheduled by 1 hour. You can still make it." "Excellent," Dr. Thorne said. He finally stood up, grabbing his briefcase. He looked at Agent Connors. "Please secure my original seat. My luggage is still on board. I expect the flight to proceed to Washington once this matter is resolved." He then turned his gaze to Captain Jensen one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, dismissive disappointment. He had given the man a chance to be reasonable. The consequences that were to follow were entirely of the pilot's own making. Without another word, Dr. Thorne and the 2 agents walked off the plane. As they disappeared down the jet bridge, a new set of individuals boarded. A man and a woman also in plain clothes, but with badges identifying them as FAA investigators, accompanied by a stern-faced man in a suit who introduced himself as Jonathan Johnson, the chief of security for American Endeavor Airlines, Chicago hub. The party was just getting started. Jonathan Johnson's face was a thundercloud. He had been ripped out of a quarterly budget meeting by a screaming phone call from a 3-star general at the Pentagon. The words "compromising national security" and "unprecedented incompetence" had been used liberally. Captain Jensen, co-pilot Bridges. Johnson barked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "In the cockpit, now. The rest of the crew to the galley." The passengers were instructed, via a terse announcement from a shaken Sarah Jenkins that there would be a significant delay and that more information would be provided shortly. They were effectively captives in a floating crime scene. The grilling began immediately. Johnson, flanked by the FAA investigators, confronted Jensen. "Richard, what in God's name were you thinking?" Johnson demanded, dispensing with any formalities. Jensen, his bravado completely shattered, began to stammer. He was suspicious. His phone call. The documents. I was acting in the interest of safety. Safety. One of the FAA agents, a woman named Harding, interjected. Did he make a threat? Did he refuse to comply with a crew instruction regarding a safety regulation? Well, no, but his attitude. His attitude. Harding shot back, her pen scratching furiously in her notepad. Captain, you grounded a commercial flight and attempted to remove a passenger because you didn't like his attitude. Is that going to be your official statement? Tom Bridges, the co-pilot, saw his career flashing before his eyes. He had a choice: go down with the sinking ship that was Captain Jensen, or tell the truth. It wasn't a difficult decision. "Sir," Tom said, addressing Jonathan Johnson. With all due respect to the captain, the passenger did nothing wrong. He was calm, quiet, and fully compliant. He ended his phone call when asked. He put his papers away when asked. There was no legitimate security concern. I advised the captain against returning to the gate. Jensen turned on him, his eyes filled with betrayal. "You're supposed to have my back. I'm supposed to follow FAA regulations." "Rick," Tom retorted, his voice finally finding its strength, "and you weren't following them. You were on a power trip." The final nail in Jensen's professional coffin came from Sarah Jenkins. When interviewed in the galley, she was calm, precise, and devastatingly thorough. She recounted Jensen's initial "James Bond" comment, his repeated and agitated calls to her, his demand that she harass a compliant passenger, and his overt anger when she had initially questioned the bizarre order. "He seemed fixated on Dr. Thorne from the moment he saw him on the monitor," she stated. "In my professional opinion, the captain's actions were not based on any credible security threat, but on personal bias." And then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, for Jensen, Amelia Vance, the passenger from the window seat, identified herself to the FAA investigators. "I'm a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice," she said, calmly presenting her credentials. "I witnessed the entire exchange. The captain's actions were a clear and flagrant abuse of his authority under Title 49 of the U.S. Code. I am prepared to give a formal, sworn statement to that effect." The FAA agent's eyes widened slightly. A federal prosecutor as an eyewitness. This was no longer just an internal airline issue or a standard FAA violation. This had the potential to become a criminal investigation. For Captain Rick Jensen, the unraveling was swift and total. He was ordered off the flight deck, his ID and wings confiscated on the spot by Jonathan Johnson. He was informed he was suspended indefinitely pending a full investigation. As he was escorted off his own plane past the rows of staring passengers, he wasn't a commander anymore. He was just a disgraced employee, his career of 20 years circling the drain, all because he couldn't stand the sight of a calm, successful black man in a suit. The wheels of bureaucracy, once set in motion by the full weight of the Department of Defense, grind with relentless efficiency. For Captain Rick Jensen, the aftermath was not a single event, but a slow, methodical dismantling of his life. The reckoning came in waves, each one more devastating than the last. The first wave was the airline. American Endeavor Airlines, facing catastrophic legal and PR blowback, moved with lightning speed. Within 48 hours, Jensen was summoned to a formal hearing at their corporate headquarters. It wasn't a discussion, it was a formality. He sat at one end of a long, polished mahogany table. At the other sat Jonathan Johnson, the head of the pilots' union representative, who looked deeply apologetic, the airline's chief counsel, and the vice president of flight operations. The VP, a stern former pilot named Grant Hemmings, read from a prepared statement. "Richard, we have reviewed the preliminary reports from the FAA, our own internal security team, and the sworn statements from co-pilot Tom Bridges, lead flight attendant Sarah Jenkins, and passenger Amelia Vance. The findings are unequivocal. You acted with gross negligence, violated multiple company policies, and demonstrated a profound lack of judgment that has exposed this airline to significant liability and reputational damage." Jensen tried to argue. "I had a gut feeling I am the pilot in command. My authority is absolute." The airline's lawyer, a woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, cut him off. "Your authority, Captain, is not absolute. It is conditional upon federal law and sound judgment, both of which you abandoned. Your gut feeling has resulted in a formal inquiry from the Department of Defense and a potential civil rights lawsuit. You didn't just inconvenience a passenger, you interfered with a senior government official on a mission critical to national security." The union rep tried to mount a feeble defense about stress and the pressures of the job, but it was hopeless. The evidence was insurmountable. Jensen was terminated effective immediately. He was stripped of his pension benefits related to misconduct and informed that the airline would not be providing legal support for any subsequent actions. He was in an instant an outcast. The second wave was the Federal Aviation Administration. Their investigation was even more clinical and damning. They convened a formal review board. They had the flight data recorder, the cockpit voice recorder, and the damning testimony from every single person involved. The CVR in particular was a catastrophe for Jensen. It captured his initial biased comments, his angry dismissal of Sarah's concerns, and Tom's reasoned objections. It painted a portrait not of a cautious captain, but of an arrogant bully on a prejudiced crusade. The FAA verdict was brutal. They revoked his airline transport pilot license, the highest level of pilot certification. The ruling stated that he had operated an aircraft in a reckless manner that endangered life and property, and had demonstrated a pattern of behavior inconsistent with the judgment required of a pilot in command. Without his license, he couldn't fly a commercial jet for any airline in the world. His career wasn't just over, it was annihilated. The third wave was personal, and in many ways the cruelest. The story scrubbed of any classified details about Dr. Thorne's mission was inevitably leaked to the press. Airline pilot fired after confrontation with high-level Pentagon official became a headline on aviation blogs and news sites. His name, Richard Jensen, was forever linked to the incident. He was shunned by former colleagues. Some pitied him, but most were angry. He had made all of them look bad. He had become a cautionary tale, a meme in pilot forums about what happens when ego overrides training. The life he had built, the identity he had wrapped himself in for over 2 decades, was gone. Captain Jensen no longer existed. There was only Rick Jensen, the unemployed 55-year-old who had thrown it all away. His wife, mortified by the public disgrace, and tired of his years of simmering anger and arrogance, left him. The financial strain was immense. Without his 6-figure salary, the mortgage on their sprawling suburban home became an impossible burden. He was forced to sell it at a loss. 6 months after that fateful day on the tarmac at O'Hare, Rick Jensen was working as a dispatcher for a regional trucking company. He sat in a cramped, fluorescent-lit office, staring at a computer screen that tracked cargo shipments across the Midwest. The powerful roar of jet engines he once commanded was replaced by the incessant beep of logistics software and the crackle of CB radios. He was grounded in every sense of the word. He would sometimes see planes flying high overhead on their way to O'Hare and feel a hollow ache in his chest. He had been a king in the sky. Now he was a nobody, a ghost haunting the fringes of the transportation industry, forever paying the price for a moment of unchecked prejudice. The karma wasn't just hard, it was a life sentence. While Rick Jensen's life was collapsing, the ripples from his actions were spreading, creating unexpected and positive changes. The incident on Flight 214 became a catalyst, a stark case study that forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. For Dr. Marcus Thorne, life returned to its demanding normal. He made his rescheduled briefing at the Pentagon, delivering the critical intelligence on Project Chimera with his usual precision. The cyber threat was neutralized, a silent victory that the public would never know about. He never filed a lawsuit. He never spoke to the press. He had no interest in personal vengeance. His only goal had been to complete his mission. However, the Department of Defense did not forget. A few weeks after the incident, he received a formal commendation from General Miller. It wasn't for his work on Project Chimera, but for his exemplary conduct and de-escalation of a civilian conflict while under operational duress. In the quiet, lethal world of national security, maintaining composure was as valuable as any weapon. Dr. Thorne's handling of the situation became an internal training module at the DOD for operatives who travel commercially. The lesson you can neutralize a threat without firing a shot. At American Endeavor Airlines, the fallout was managed with a massive course correction. Facing a firestorm of bad press and the terrifying prospect of being blacklisted for government contracts, the company's CEO, a shrewd woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation to Amelia, took decisive action. She issued a direct, unequivocal public apology to Dr. Thorne, acknowledging the unacceptable and biased behavior of their former employee. But she went further. She reached out to civil rights organizations and aviation experts to completely overhaul the airline's pilot-in-command authority and bias training. The new program was mandatory for all 15,000 of their pilots and flight attendants. And who did they choose to help develop and lead the new training for the flight crew's Sarah Jenkins? Her calm professionalism and courage in questioning Captain Jensen's orders had been noted by everyone from the FAA to the airline's executive board. She was promoted to a senior management position in in-flight services, given a significant raise, and tasked with ensuring that no passenger would ever have to endure what Dr. Thorne had. She became a quiet hero within the company, a symbol of integrity. Co-pilot Tom Bridges also saw his career advance. He was praised for his testimony and his attempts to reason with Jensen. The airline fast-tracked his captaincy training, recognizing his sound judgment under pressure. He learned a valuable lesson that day. Sometimes the most important part of being a co-pilot is protecting the flight from the captain himself. The federal prosecutor, Amelia Vance, used the incident as a basis for a Justice Department memo. She highlighted the ambiguity in current regulations that allowed a pilot's subjective feeling to override a passenger's civil rights. Her report led to the FAA issuing a new directive to all U.S. airlines, clarifying the specific, observable, and non-discriminatory criteria required for removing a passenger from a flight. The "I have a bad feeling" defense was officially rendered obsolete. The story of Flight 214 became a legend within the industry. Pilots would talk about it in hushed tones in ready rooms from Dallas to Dubai. It was a stark reminder that the uniform bestowed authority, not infallibility. It taught a new generation of aviators that their biggest security checks shouldn't just be on the instrument panel, but within themselves, checking for the hidden bugs of prejudice, ego and the abuse of power. The actions of one foolish man had, paradoxically, made the skies a little safer and a little fairer for everyone. 1 year to the day after the incident at O'Hare, Dr. Marcus Thorne was once again buckling himself into an airline seat. This time he was flying from Dulles to a NATO summit in Brussels. It was another mission, another set of encrypted files in his briefcase. As he settled in, he felt a familiar sense of detachment, his mind already on the complex geopolitical strategies he would soon be discussing. The boarding process was nearly complete when a man in a crisp pilot's uniform stopped in the aisle next to him. He was young, probably in his late 30s, with a calm and respectful demeanor. "Dr. Thorne?" the pilot asked. Thorne looked up, a flicker of apprehension passing through him before he suppressed it. "Yes." "I'm Captain Bridges," the pilot said, extending a hand. "Tom Bridges. I just wanted to welcome you aboard our flight today. I saw your name on the manifest and I felt I should come and say hello personally." Thorne recognized the name instantly. The co-pilot. He shook the offered hand, which was firm and steady. "Captain Bridges, it's good to see you. I was the co-pilot on that flight from Chicago last year." Bridges said, his voice low and sincere. "I never had the chance to say it then, but I wanted to apologize for what you went through. There was no excuse for it. And I wanted to thank you." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Thank me. For what?" "For handling the situation with such professionalism," Bridges replied. "You taught a lot of us a valuable lesson that day about what real authority looks like. It's not about the stripes on your shoulder. It's about the integrity within. Because of what happened, our training is better. Our crews are more aware. You made things better for everyone, even if it came at a terrible cost that day." From the galley, a flight attendant watched the exchange with a knowing smile. It was Sarah Jenkins. She had arranged her schedule to be on this flight, specifically when she saw Dr. Thorne's name. She caught his eye and gave him a warm, respectful nod. In that moment, the circle felt complete. The venom of one man's prejudice had been transformed through the integrity of others into a catalyst for positive reform. The system, though flawed, had worked. Accountability had been delivered, lessons had been learned, and a quiet, dignified man could now fly to his next vital mission, not as a source of suspicion, but as an honored guest. As Captain Bridges returned to the cockpit to guide the massive aircraft into the sky, Dr. Thorne looked out the window. He wasn't just a passenger on a plane. He was a testament to a simple, powerful truth that in the end, the weight of a person's character will always eventually overcome the burden of prejudice. And up in the cockpit, Captain Tom Bridges began his pre-flight checks. His hands steady his judgment, clear, ready to command his aircraft, with the kind of honor and respect that his former superior never could. 2 years after his termination, the world had moved on, but Rick Jensen had not. He was trapped in the amber of that single catastrophic decision. The trucking dispatcher job had lasted 6 months before he was let go for his perpetually sour attitude. He then bounced between a series of increasingly menial jobs: a security guard on a graveyard shift, a stocker at a big box store, and finally, a part-time driver for a ride-sharing service, a bitter irony he was forced to swallow every day. His arena of command, once a multi-million-dollar cockpit, was now the driver's seat of a depreciating sedan. His passengers were no longer business executives and vacationing families, but drunken college students and weary travelers heading to the very airport he was no longer welcomed in. O'Hare, the gravitational center of his failure. He often found himself there, even when he wasn't working, drawn to the place like a ghost to its haunted mansion. He'd sit in the airport hotel bar, nursing a cheap beer, watching the silver birds take off and land. He'd watch the pilots, proud and confident in their uniforms, striding through the terminals, and a toxic mix of envy and rage would curdle in his stomach. One Tuesday evening, the anniversary of the incident, he was sitting in his usual booth when a familiar face walked in. It was Frank Miller, a captain for another major airline with whom Jensen had flown in his early days. Frank spotted him, hesitated for a moment, and then out of some lingering sense of pity or camaraderie, walked over. "Rick, my God, is that you?" Frank asked, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. Jensen looked older than his years. His face was puffy, his eyes were bloodshot, and the crisp authority he once carried had been replaced by a weary, defeated slump. "Frank." Jensen grunted, not bothering to smile. "Fancy seeing you here, still playing bus driver in the sky." Frank winced at the bitterness in his tone, but slid into the booth anyway. "Just finished a run from Frankfurt. Layover for the night. How have you been, Rick?" It was a simple question, but it opened the floodgates of Jensen's resentment. "How have I been?" he sneered. "I've been great. My life was destroyed by some pencil pusher with a fancy ID card and a politically correct airline that threw me to the wolves. That's how I've been." Frank sighed. "I heard about what happened, Rick. It was a tough break." "A tough break." Jensen slammed his beer down, sloshing foam onto the table. "It was a setup. The guy was trying to provoke me from the start. The phone call, the secret papers. He wanted me to challenge him. And the crew that backstabbing Tom Bridges and that sanctimonious Sarah Jenkins, they couldn't wait to twist the knife. They were all in on it." Frank listened, his expression growing more somber. He had hoped that time might have given his old colleague some perspective, some sense of accountability. He was wrong. Jensen had constructed a narrative in which he was the sole victim, a martyr sacrificed on the altar of corporate cowardice. "Rick," Frank said carefully, "everyone knows the pilot in command has final authority. But that authority comes with the responsibility of sound judgment. What you did, it wasn't a tough call. It was a bad call. You let your pride get in the way." "My pride?" Jensen's voice rose, drawing stares from other patrons. "It was about security. Nobody backs the pilot anymore. We're supposed to be in charge, but one complaint from the right kind of person, and your career is toast. I did what I thought was right." Frank shook his head slowly, the last of his pity evaporating, replaced by a sad clarity. "No, you didn't, Rick. You bullied a man because you didn't like the look of him. You abused your power. I've seen the FAA report. It's required reading now. You didn't just cross a line. You flew a plane straight through it. That's why nobody stood with you. Not the union, not the other pilots. Nobody." He pushed a $20 bill onto the table. "Look, I hope you find some peace, man. I really do. But you can't blame the world for a hole you dug yourself." Frank stood up and walked away, leaving Jensen alone with the harsh, unfiltered truth. Jensen stared at the $20 bill as if it were poison. He didn't want charity. He wanted his life back. He wanted his uniform, his wings, his kingdom in the sky. He looked out the large window at the airfield. A Boeing 737, the same model he used to fly for American Endeavor, was gracefully lifting off the runway, its lights climbing into the dark expanse. For a fleeting moment, he felt the phantom sensation of the controls in his hands, the surge of power, the freedom. Then it was gone. He was just a bitter old man in a bar, a ghost haunting the gates of a life he had single-handedly destroyed. He was grounded, and he was beginning to understand that his sentence was for life. While Rick Jensen's world shrank to the confines of his own bitterness, the positive legacies of his failure continued to grow, nurtured by the very people he had scorned. The incident on Flight 214 became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a cornerstone for a new philosophy. The instructor. In a brightly lit classroom at the American Endeavor Airlines Flight Academy near Dallas, Sarah Jenkins stood before a class of new flight attendant recruits. Now the director of in-flight culture and safety, she exuded a calm, unshakable confidence. On the screen behind her was a slide titled Case Study 214 De-Escalation and Implicit Bias. Authority is not the same as power, she told the class, her voice resonating with hard-won wisdom. Power is forcing compliance. Authority is earning trust. On Flight 214, the captain used power, and in doing so, he lost all of his authority. Your job on an aircraft is first and foremost safety, and safety is not just about a locked cabin door or a secure overhead bin. It is about making sure that every single person on that plane feels seen, respected, and secure. Your greatest tool is not the rule book, but your own empathy. She used the redacted details of that day to teach a new generation how to be guardians, not just of the cabin, but of the dignity of those within it. Her legacy was turning a moment of crisis into a curriculum of compassion. The mentor. Thousands of miles away, in a state-of-the-art flight simulator, Captain Tom Bridges was conducting a final check ride for a promising young first officer. Tom was now a check airman, one of the most respected pilots in the fleet, responsible for shaping the next generation of captains. During a complex simulated emergency, the young pilot made a call to have a disruptive passenger in the virtual cabin removed by security. Tom paused the simulation. "Talk me through that decision, son," Tom said calmly. The passenger was agitated. Arguing with the flight attendant seemed anxious, the co-pilot explained. "My gut told me he was a potential threat." Tom nodded. "Okay, let's rewind. Was he threatening anyone? Was he violating a safety regulation, or was he just having a bad day and handling it poorly?" He guided the young pilot through the scenario again, this time focusing on the de-escalation techniques that were now standard procedure techniques born from the ashes of Flight 214. "Gut feelings are important," Tom concluded, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "But they have to be filtered through training procedure and a heavy dose of humility. We fly 500,000 people a day. We can't afford to let personal bias sit in the co-pilot seat. Remember that and you'll be a great captain." His legacy was ensuring the mistakes of the past did not become the standard of the future. The statesman. 5 years after the incident, Dr. Marcus Thorne stood at a podium at the National Defense University, addressing the latest graduating class of the nation's brightest military and intelligence officers. He was now the deputy director of the National Security Agency, one of the most powerful and anonymous figures in Washington. He was grayer at the temples, but his gaze was as sharp as ever. He didn't speak of cyber warfare or espionage. Instead, he spoke about the nature of power. "You will soon hold positions that grant you immense authority," he told the sea of uniformed graduates. "You will have access to secrets, command over assets, and the ability to influence world events. But never confuse the power of your position with the strength of your character. The former can be stripped away in an instant. The latter is the only thing you truly own." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "The greatest tests of your lives will likely not come on the battlefield or in a sealed briefing room. They will come in the quiet, unexpected moments when your authority is challenged, your patience is tested, and your character is laid bare. How you respond in those moments with arrogance, or with grace, with prejudice, or with perspective, will define your legacy far more than any medal or promotion." He never mentioned Flight 214. He didn't have to. The lesson of that day was now woven into the fabric of his philosophy. His legacy was not just in the secrets he protected, but in the wisdom he shared that the ultimate clearance level is integrity, and it is a clearance you must grant yourself every single day. Thus, a single ugly confrontation on a grounded plane created 3 vital legacies, one of empathy, one of mentorship, and one of quiet integrity. And in a lonely bar near O'Hare, a 4th legacy festered a ghost, at the gate, a permanent living warning of what happens when a man is given command of everything but himself. The story of Dr. Thorne and Captain Jensen isn't just a tale of drama at 30,000 feet. It's a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences that ripple far beyond a single moment. It shows us that true authority comes from character, not a title, and that prejudice, when confronted by quiet strength and integrity, will ultimately collapse under its own weight. This was more than just one man being kicked off a plane. It was a defining moment that reshaped airline policy and ruined a career built on ego. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of karma and the importance of standing up to injustice, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that will make you think. Your support helps us continue to bring these incredible narratives to light. Thank you for listening.